We are announcing that we have the audio from the officials, and we have retained and are consulting with some of the foremost audio engineering experts to review those audio tapes from the Sea Tow call in its entirety. We also, and Attorney Hertz may go into greater detail on these matters, have consulted President Mariel with Oceanic engineering experts to talk about how these facts are lining up. The fact that they say Nolan's body was found in the same location where they say they left him at. And so we want to know, how is that possible with the oceanic tides?
Yeah.
We want the experts. I mean, you got low tides and high tides. It's not adding up. So we are going to dot every I and cross every T until we find out what happened to Nolan Wells. Attorney Hertz will also go into a little more detail, and Attorney Park, about how we're trying to coordinate with Dr. Roger Mitchell, who conducted the independent autopsy of Nolan Wells, to be able to inspect his throat that was missing with his body when he was flown to do the autopsy with Dr. Mitchell. Also, we are hopeful that they will discuss with Dr. Mitchell the photographs and observations made at the time when Nolan was first discovered, because Dr. Mitchell did not get an opportunity until July 10th to be able to examine his body. And at that time, we know the airways and the lungs had already been dissected and so forth, so we can't tell if there was the presence of water or not. That would suggest whether he drowned or not. And remember what Dr. Roger Mitchell said in his autopsy. President Mariel, he talked about the fact that to say he drowned does not draw the conclusions of what happened to Nolan Wells. He said it is equally important to know at what condition was Nolan Wells' body when he went into the water. Was he conscious or was he unconscious? Was he forced into the water or did he go unforced into the water? He said all of these things are very important. And so we're dotting I's and crossing T's. We are focused on getting to the truth, and we stand for the truth. Me and everybody on my legal team stand for the truth, no matter who it implicates or who it exonerates.
Yes.
We stand for justice, no matter who it convicts or who it acquits.
On the evening of July 4th, 2026, somewhere along the Mississippi Gulf Coast, a mother received a phone call that would shatter her world. Her 18-year-old son had not come home from a holiday boat trip to a remote barrier island. His friends had returned. His phone had returned. But Nolan Xavier Wells did not. What followed was not a swift rescue. It was not a rapid investigation with clear answers. It was 40 hours of searching, a body discovered in shallow water, 2 autopsies that raised more questions than they answered, and a family left standing in a void where the truth should have been. This is not speculation. These are the documented facts of a case that has gripped a nation. And the deeper you look, the harder it becomes to accept that anyone fully understands what happened on Horn Island. If you believe cases like this deserve to be seen and heard, take 1 second right now to hit subscribe and like this video. This is DAV Crime Records, and we do not look away. Nolan Xavier Wells was born on August 19, 2007, in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. He was raised in the Catholic faith, baptized as a child, and grew up worshiping at churches in both Moss Point and Ocean Springs. His mother, Christine Wansley, and his father, Elmore Wansley, raised him alongside 5 siblings. By every account available, Nolan was not the kind of young man whose name you expected to hear in a headline like this. He was a 2025 graduate of Ocean Springs High School, where he excelled as a 3-sport athlete in football, basketball, and baseball. He also contributed to GTV, the school's student media program. His head football coach, Jake Bramlett, said publicly that Nolan carried himself with humility, treated others with respect, worked hard, and led by example. Bramlett added that his character spoke louder than his accomplishments, and that he was loved deeply by his teammates and coaches. On National Signing Day in 2025, Nolan stood in front of cameras and called it a blessing to continue his football career at Southwest Mississippi Community College. He spoke about sharing that moment with friends and teammates, many of whom were heading to college alongside him. He was a wide receiver with a future ahead of him, studying general business and preparing for a season that was supposed to begin the week after the 4th of July. His mother has described him publicly as a loving son who cared deeply about his family and friends, someone who enjoyed making people laugh and who preferred bringing people together rather than creating conflict. His obituary stated simply that he made the world a better place by being in it. That was the young man who climbed onto a boat on the morning of Independence Day. A young man with a future, a family, and a full life stretching out in front of him. According to GPS data from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the boat departed from the southern shore of Mississippi at 9:56 in the morning on July 4th, arriving at the western tip of Horn Island at 11:14. Horn Island is an uninhabited, federally protected barrier island, roughly 10 miles off the Mississippi coast in the Gulf of Mexico. The National Park Service has stated clearly that there is no staff, drinking water, shelter, facilities, or communication on the island. It is a remote sandbar surrounded by open water. Roughly 300 people, many of them former high school classmates, had gathered on the island that day to celebrate the holiday. Photos from the boat show Nolan towering above his friends, his arm casually around their shoulders, smiling wide. He was the only black person visible in the photographs from the trip, a detail that would later fuel public scrutiny and broader conversation. According to the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, Nolan was last seen on the island around 3 in the afternoon, dressed in blue swim trunks and sunglasses, near the northwestern end. His friends told officials that he said he would find another ride back to the mainland. That is the baseline. That is the one fact no one involved has disputed. But the moment you move past that baseline, the accounts begin to fracture. According to civil rights attorney Ben Crump, who now represents the Wells family, a young woman on the island told investigators that after she finished a conversation with Nolan, he told her he was heading back to the boat. The friends on the boat, however, offered a different version. They said Nolan had told them he intended to stay behind with the girl. Those two accounts point in entirely opposite directions. They cannot both be true, yet they were both given to investigators as explanations for why an 18-year-old was left alone on a remote island 10 miles from the coast. Around 4 in the afternoon, a distress call was placed from the boat. The recording, released by the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, captured a teen on the boat calling Sea Tow, a private marine towing company. In the call, the teen said their bilge pump had stopped working and that they were sinking. The teen asked for immediate assistance. Background commotion and multiple voices can be heard as the call plays out. The dispatcher then spoke with a captain for the towing company, who relayed that a relative of the boat owner had reported the issue was resolved and that they did not need help at that time. Sea Tow ultimately did not tow the vessel. One of Nolan's friends, Warren Hudson, later said on a podcast that Nolan chose to stay behind after the boat began taking in water. Hudson stated plainly that it was an emergency, that they were trying to save the boat, and that Nolan decided to stay on the island with the girl he had been talking to. However, during a July 10th press conference, Nolan's parents said they did not believe their son would have voluntarily separated from his group. His father, Elmore Wansley, told CBS Mornings that Nolan always stayed with the group and that as a parent, he would never have allowed a friend's child to remain alone on a barrier island. GPS records show the boat left Horn Island at 4:31 in the afternoon. It returned to the original departure dock, then traveled into Fort Bayou around 5:52 before returning to the dock again at 6:06. Nolan was not aboard. He was reported missing that evening when his family received a call from one of his friends around 11 at night. The next morning, July 5th, his mother Christine posted on social media asking for help finding her son. The Jackson County Sheriff's Department launched a search effort alongside the United States Coast Guard, the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, and the United Cajun Navy. 3 drone launches were attempted on July 5th, but all 3 failed due to software issues and extreme heat that caused a battery to swell and separate mid-flight. The search stretched on for more than 40 hours. On the morning of July 6th, at approximately 8:45, a National Park Service ranger located a body on the island's north shore near its western tip. The following day, the Jackson County Coroner's Office confirmed through dental records that the body was Nolan Xavier Wells. He was 18 years old. He had been in the water, in July heat, on a remote island for approximately 2 days. His mother called him a special soul. She asked the public to give her family space to grieve. And then the questions began. The first major question centered on the phone. Nolan's friends had returned to shore with his cell phone but without him. When his mother tracked the device using Life 360, she recovered it and immediately noticed something she publicly described as suspicious. There were no pictures, no videos, and no content on either of his 2 Snapchat accounts from the 4th of July. For an 18-year-old who was, by all descriptions, constantly on his phone, the absence struck her as deeply unusual. One of Nolan's friends responded to this directly on the record, stating that no one had any knowledge of anything being deleted, that there was no reason for anybody to access the phone, and that none of them had Nolan's password. That is the friend's stated position, and it is documented. But the mechanics of Snapchat complicate that defense. The platform has an auto-delete feature. Messages disappear by default. You do not need someone's password to allow that content to vanish. You just need time. And between the moment that phone left the island and the moment Nolan's mother recovered it, there was time. The family's legal team has since issued subpoenas to social media companies requesting all data associated with Nolan's accounts, including IP addresses tied to friend activity, all posts, stories, chats, messages, direct messages, photos, video recordings, GPS data, friend list history, and any other information stored by the platforms. Legal preservation letters were also sent, instructing recipients to preserve all evidence in its original unaltered form and to suspend any automatic deletion or overwrite functions that could erase potential evidence. A retired FBI agent noted publicly that investigators may be able to recover several layers of data from Snapchat accounts even if information was deleted, because removing something from a screen does not necessarily wipe it from a company's servers. The second major question arrived on July 22nd, when Crump announced the results of the independent autopsy at the NACNP convention in Chicago. The examination was performed on July 10th by Dr. Roger Mitchell, a board-certified forensic pathologist and president of the National Medical Association. The autopsy was privately funded, with former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick publicly covering the cost. The findings were stark in what they could not determine. Dr. Mitchell identified several limitations that created barriers to establishing a definitive cause and manner of death. The most significant limitation was the inability to directly observe the airway and lungs for water, and to directly observe the stomach for gastric contents. Parts of Nolan's throat were not in his body when it was received for the independent examination, which is a documented consequence of the initial state autopsy procedure. The original toxicology results had also not yet been received. Dr. Mitchell further noted that decomposition can obscure injuries and complicate toxicology. The pathologist found no apparent lacerations, fractures, or deep tissue injuries, but the report did document red discoloration in the soft tissue at the back of Nolan's head. Medical experts have stated publicly that such discoloration could represent decompositional changes in the musculature, or it could be from blunt force injury to the back of the head and neck. The answer depends on information the independent examiner did not have access to at the time. Crump read directly from the report, stating that the pathologist could not rule out if any intervening non-accidental factors contributed to or caused the death of Nolan Wells. He added that even a drowning determination would not explain the condition Nolan was in when he entered the water, including whether he was conscious, unconscious, or forced in. Dr. Mitchell himself wrote in his report that confirming how a person entered the water is especially important for those who can swim, as was the case with Nolan Wells. The state autopsy, conducted by the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office on July 7th, has been completed. But the results have not been made public. The Jackson County District Attorney's Office has stated that the official findings will remain sealed until a grand jury reviews the evidence, calling it standard procedure for most unnatural or suspicious deaths in the county. The district attorney has also said that convening a grand jury does not mean there is any criminality involved. That may be true, but what it means for the Wells family is that nearly a month after burying their son, they still do not have an official cause of death. Christine Wansley said publicly that having the preliminary autopsy results and hearing nothing from local authorities was heartbreaking and concerning. The only question she has asked, again and again, is simply what happened to her son. The third major question involves the Sea Tow recording itself. Crump announced at the National Urban League Conference that his legal team has retained top audio engineering experts to review the full distress call. They are not only examining what was said, they are analyzing what can be heard in the background, the voices, the commotion, the ambient sounds that did not make it into any official summary. A forensic expert has already publicly noted that a version of the recording released by TMZ was 20 seconds longer than the original and carried a different digital fingerprint. Multiple parties are now disputing what the recording actually contains. Crump has also announced that his team has consulted with Oceanic engineering experts to examine how and why Nolan's body was found in the same general area where his friends said they last saw him, the northwestern tip of Horn Island. Crump stated directly that it does not add up and questioned how oceanic tides, with their natural fluctuations between high and low, would leave a body in the same location over the course of 2 days. Investigators have interviewed approximately 60 witnesses. The FBI has been brought in to assist with examining digital evidence. The Jackson County Sheriff's Department has specifically asked the public for original unedited photos and videos taken on July 4th, particularly those depicting alleged altercations or containing images of Nolan Wells. That word, altercations, appeared in the official request from law enforcement, an acknowledgement that something may have occurred on that island that has not been fully accounted for. A former FBI agent, Jennifer Coffindaffer, reviewed the publicly available evidence and stated that what she could see publicly appeared to point toward a tragic accident. She cited surveillance footage, witness accounts, Coast Guard communications, and riptide conditions. That is a serious professional assessment, and it deserves consideration. But she herself acknowledged that her review was based only on what was publicly known, and she warned that more details could still emerge. She was not working with the sealed state autopsy, the raw distress call audio, the forensic phone data, or whatever 60 witnesses told investigators behind closed doors. And that is the gap this entire case lives inside. The distance between what is known and what is being shown. The distance between one version of events and another. The distance between a family searching for truth and a system that has not yet delivered it. At a memorial service on July 20th at Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs, hundreds gathered wearing light blue to honor Nolan's memory. Attorney Ben Crump and Reverend Al Sharpton stood alongside his grieving parents. A $50,000 reward was announced for information leading to an arrest. Tyler Perry, watching a live stream, matched it, bringing the total to $100,000. Former NFL player Terrell Owens later added $25,000 more. The reward fund has since grown to $225,000. But the reward has not produced an arrest. The grand jury has not convened. The state autopsy remains sealed. And Christine Wansley, the mother of an 18-year-old boy who went to an island with his friends on the 4th of July and never came home, is still waiting for someone to tell her why. Nolan Wells cooked dinner for his parents on July 3rd. It was the last time they saw him alive. His mother has said he wanted to have 3 daughters someday. He had already picked out their names. That future no longer exists. And the answers that might explain why are sitting behind closed doors, locked inside sealed reports, buried in server farms, and scattered across the memories of people who were there that day and have not yet given a single account that holds together without contradiction. There is a question sitting at the center of this case that no official has answered. Not the coroner, not the sheriff, not the district attorney. Not a single person with the authority to close this file has looked at Christine Wansley and told her, with certainty, what happened to her son on that island. And the reason that matters is not just because Nolan was her child. It matters because the system that is supposed to deliver that answer is the same system that sealed it, scheduled it for a grand jury, and told this family to wait. The independent autopsy performed by Dr. Roger Mitchell, the former chief medical examiner of Washington, D.C., came back with findings that raised more questions than they resolved. The preliminary report stated that the cause and manner of death was undetermined, pending further investigation. That language was deliberate and specific. It was not a conclusion. It was a declaration that the available evidence did not allow for one. Among the most significant limitations documented in that report was the inability to directly observe the airway and lungs for the presence of water. In a case where drowning is the proposed explanation, that limitation is not a minor footnote. It is the missing center of the entire forensic argument. The throat tissue that would allow a pathologist to examine the upper airway for signs of how someone entered the water had been removed during the initial state autopsy in Mississippi. Medical experts who spoke to national news outlets confirmed that removing tissue during an autopsy is standard practice. Pathologists do it to examine deeper inside the body. That part, by itself, is not unusual. But the consequence in a case like this one is that when the family paid to have a second examination performed, the independent doctor sat down to review a body that no longer had the anatomical structures needed to answer the most important question. Dr. Mitchell wrote directly in his report that confirming how a person entered the water is especially important for deaths of persons who can swim. Nolan Wells could swim. That sentence in that report changes the entire weight of what it means that the airway examination could not be completed. Because the argument that Nolan simply drowned, on its face, rests on the assumption that the water entered his body naturally. If you cannot confirm that, you cannot confirm that assumption. And if you cannot confirm that assumption, you cannot close this case with a drowning determination that satisfies the forensic standard. The independent pathologist also documented red discoloration in the soft tissue at the back of Nolan's head. Medical professionals speaking publicly about the case noted that such findings can indicate decompositional changes in the musculature, or they can result from blunt force injury to the back of the head and neck. Without additional data, without the preserved tissue, without a complete forensic review, determining which interpretation applies is not possible. Dr. Mitchell acknowledged those limitations in his own report. Ben Crump acknowledged them publicly. The family acknowledged them. And still, no one outside the grand jury process has been allowed to see the state autopsy that might contain the answers to those questions. State-level forensic pathologists who did not work on the case told CNN that the state's autopsy could provide investigators with better insight into what led to Nolan's death. They pointed out that the state examiner had access to witness information, retained tissue samples, and other evidence that the independent examiner simply did not have. Those same experts acknowledged that the full process could take months. Nolan's mother is measuring time in the days since she last heard her son's voice. The system is measuring it in procedural timelines. That gap, the space between a grieving family's urgency and an institution's pace, is precisely where this entire case has settled. Now here is the part of this story that demands your full attention. Ben Crump did not walk into Nashville, Tennessee alone. He brought 3 families with him, and the reason he did that is the most quietly devastating piece of context surrounding Nolan Wells' death. On the same day Nolan went missing from Horn Island in Mississippi, July 4th, a young man named Tyler Smith was shot and killed at a gathering on Bluebonnet Drive in Lexington, Kentucky. Tyler Smith was 18 years old. He was a recent graduate of Lafayette High School. His grandmother, Nissie Anderson, described him as always positive, someone for whom family was everything, a driven and joyful young man who had already signed up to attend Bluegrass Community and Technical College, where he planned to pursue a degree in robotics. He was supposed to be celebrating the beginning of the rest of his life that weekend. Lexington police concluded that Tyler Smith died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. His family disputes that conclusion entirely. His grandmother said flatly that she does not believe it was self-inflicted. His uncle noted that the left lens of Smith's glasses was damaged, while the gunshot wound entered through his right cheek. The family told reporters they believe Smith died after being shot in a fight, not by his own hand. They also said they do not know the man who was subsequently charged, a 20-year-old named Bryce Chestnut, who was arrested on a charge of tampering with physical evidence. Tyler Smith's family said they had never heard his name before. There is one more detail in the Tyler Smith case that cannot be passed over without stopping. According to the Lexington Police Department's own documentation, the firearm that officers recovered at the scene did not match the shell casing found there. The gun did not match the shell casing. That is not a claim from the family's attorneys. That information comes from a law enforcement citation. And yet the official determination remains a self-inflicted gunshot wound. No homicide investigation. One tampering charge. A family with no answers. And a 24-hour news cycle that largely moved on. Now move back 3 months. April 13th, 2026. A young man named Daniel Erving, 18 years old, went to Lake Ray Hubbard near Raylet, Texas, with 2 other teenagers. He jumped into the water from a railroad bridge. He drowned. His body was not recovered until 4 days later, on April 17th, because the people who were with him did not notify authorities or his family that anything had happened. According to a Dallas police arrest affidavit, after Erving drowned, the 2 teens who had been with him fled the scene. One threw Erving's clothing into a tree line near the bridge. The other threw Erving's cell phone from the vehicle. When investigators later searched the phone of 19-year-old Lucas Roper, the affidavit states that Roper had deleted all communication between himself and Erving from that day. When detectives interviewed Roper, he reportedly told them he panicked and did not want to get into trouble. The Dallas County Medical Examiner ruled Daniel Erving's death an accidental drowning. Roper and a 16-year-old juvenile were subsequently arrested and charged with tampering with physical evidence, a third-degree felony. No one has been charged with causing Daniel Erving's death. His mother, Tamika Erving, stood at a press conference alongside Ben Crump and said her son received only partial justice. She wants murder charges. She wants to understand why no one went back for her son. She wants to know why a mother had to wait 4 days to learn her child was gone, not because investigators were delayed, but because the people who watched it happen drove away. Now stand back and look at all 3 of these cases together. Because this is what Ben Crump walked into Nashville to say out loud, and what this community needs to sit with. Daniel Erving, 18 years old, an honor roll student and swimmer, Texas. April, dead. Official ruling, accidental drowning. Evidence tampering charges filed. No charges for his death. Tyler Smith, 18 years old, a high school graduate with a future planned, Kentucky. July 4th, dead. Official ruling. Self-inflicted gunshot wound. Evidence tampering charge filed. No charges for his death. Nolan Xavier Wells, 18 years old, a college football player, Mississippi. July 4th, dead. No official cause of death determined. No charges of any kind. No one held accountable. 3 18-year-old black men. 3 months. 3 states. 3 families standing on a stage in Nashville, asking the same question in 3 different dialects of grief. Where is the accountability? Crump has been deliberate and precise about what he is and is not arguing. He is not claiming these 3 deaths are connected by a single perpetrator. He is not alleging a conspiracy that stretches across state lines. He is saying something more structural than that. He is arguing that the shape of how these cases are being handled, the rapid accidental rulings, the missing and altered evidence, the families left without answers while the system moves at its own pace, represents a pattern worth naming. And until someone names it, it remains invisible. The NOC national president, Derek Johnson, went further. He used a specific word at a formal event to characterize how investigators handled the Wells case. He said they were derelict in their duties to follow up and to ensure that, regardless of what happened, there was a proper investigation. Derelict. That is a word with weight. That is the president of one of the oldest civil rights organizations in the country, placing a formal characterization on the official response to the death of an 18-year-old boy, and doing it on the record, in public, in front of witnesses. That word does not disappear. It sits in the record, and it waits for a grand jury to either validate or contradict it. Now let us talk about where the Nolan Wells case stands legally. Precisely, as of this moment, the state autopsy is complete. The results are sealed and will be presented to a grand jury once the Jackson County Sheriff's Department concludes its death investigation. The Jackson County District Attorney's Office has confirmed this publicly. That grand jury will see the full findings. The public will not yet. Attorneys for the Wells family have announced this is the clearest timeline yet in a case that has been characterized by the absence of any timeline at all. The phone investigation is now being coordinated jointly between the family's legal team and county investigators. Attorney Hers, who is working alongside Crump on the case, confirmed they are working toward a tentative agreement with the district attorney's office to have all phones related to the case examined by both sides simultaneously. That is a meaningful development. It means the family's representatives will be present when the forensic review happens. They will not be asked to accept someone else's summary of what the phones contained. They will see the raw findings alongside the county. The Sea Tow distress call is under active professional analysis. Crump's team has retained top audio engineers to review the complete recording, not the truncated clip that circulated online in the days after Nolan's death, but the full, unedited audio, including everything in the background, every voice, every ambient sound captured in the moments just after Nolan was last seen, and just before his friends left that island without him. Officials will also be reviewing those audio tapes as part of the formal investigative process. 2 separate reviews by 2 separate teams of a recording that multiple parties are now disputing in terms of its content and its completeness. Here is what remains open. No cause of death has been officially determined. No charges have been filed in connection with Nolan Wells's death. The state autopsy results are sealed. The independent autopsy is inconclusive. Witness accounts still do not align. The phone investigation is still being coordinated. The Oceanic engineering analysis that Crump commissioned, examining whether the tidal patterns around Horn Island are consistent with the body being found where it was found, has not yet produced a public result. 60 witnesses have given statements to investigators, and none of what they said has been released to the public. What all of that means, in plain terms, is that this case is standing at an inflection point. The grand jury will either see enough to recommend formal charges, or it will not. The forensic reviews will either produce findings that shift the official narrative, or they will not. And whatever is in that sealed state autopsy will either align with the independent examination, or it will present something entirely different. And while all of that unfolds inside a legal process the public cannot observe, 2 people are getting up every morning and doing the hardest thing a parent can do. They are living inside a question with no answer. Elmore Wansley stood at the National Urban League Conference, in front of a national audience, and he did not demand arrests. He did not call for anyone by name. He asked one question. He said, "Where is the empathy?" He said, "If you know something, please come forward." That is the ask of a father who has not been given a single official answer and who has chosen to channel his grief into a plea rather than an accusation. Christine Wansley has said publicly that when law enforcement told her and her husband the death was most likely an accidental drowning, it made them uncomfortable. She asked, "Why are we so quick to rush to this?" That question, from a mother who knew her son, who tracked his phone across the water to recover it herself, who noticed immediately that an 18-year-old boy had no holiday content on either of his Snapchat accounts, was not the reaction of someone looking for a conspiracy. It was the reaction of a woman who knew something was wrong before she could articulate what, and she said it clearly. They will not rest until they have answers. They will not be distracted. The community that gathered around this family tells its own story. Colin Kaepernick funded the independent autopsy so the Wells family would not have to fight a state system and a sealed report alone. Tyler Perry stepped in to help cover funeral costs after learning about the case. Perry has spoken publicly about his own experiences with unanswered questions surrounding the death of loved ones, including his nephew's death in a Louisiana prison, a case he has said he still questions. He said he understood the toll of not having the answers a grieving family needs. Reverend Al Sharpton stood at the press conference and said 4 words that carry everything this family is asking for. Let the chips fall. Do not protect anything. Do not predetermine anything. Let the evidence land wherever it lands and follow it honestly. That is not a radical demand. It is the minimum standard any family deserves when their child dies under circumstances that do not add up. Nolan Xavier Wells was a wide receiver. He was a college freshman. He cooked salmon for his parents on the evening of July 3rd, the night before he left for Horn Island. He sat in the kitchen with the people who raised him and made them a meal, and then he went to spend the night with his friends. When he boarded that boat the next morning, he had no reason to believe he would not come home. Neither did his parents. Neither did anyone who loved him. His homegoing celebration was not a traditional funeral. His former teammates from high school and middle school were invited. Boys who ran routes alongside him. Boys who celebrated with him on Friday nights, and who remembered him as a person long before anyone knew him as a case number. Hundreds gathered at Center Point Church in Ocean Springs, wearing light blue in his honor. They were not there because of a headline. They were there because they knew him. A $225,000 reward has been offered for information leading to an arrest. It has not produced one. The grand jury has not yet convened. The state autopsy remains sealed, and a family in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, is still waiting for one official to look them in the eye and tell them the truth about what happened on that island. The questions are still open. The evidence is still being reviewed. And this channel is not moving on. When the grand jury convenes, we will be here. When the forensic phone analysis produces a result, we will be here. When the audio engineers release their findings on that sea tow call, we will be here. When the Oceanic engineering report comes back on those tidal patterns, we will be here. Every single development in this case will be covered on DAV Crime Records because this family has made it absolutely clear that they are not going to stop, and neither are we. If you want to be in this community when those answers come, hit subscribe right now. Hit the like button. It takes 1 second, and it is the simplest way to make sure you do not miss a single update on this case. Drop in the comments the one detail from everything you have heard today that you cannot let go of, because sometimes the thing that stays with a viewer is the thing that needs the most scrutiny. Nolan Xavier Wells, 18 years old, a wide receiver, a son. The young man who made his family salmon for dinner the night before he left and never came home. He deserves the truth. His family deserves the truth. And the only way that truth comes to light is if enough people refuse to look away. We are not looking away.